Okay, we're on chapter 10, page 99. The title of the chapter is What Was Left? So where did they leave off last time? Do you remember?
A village.
A potato land.
Okay, please raise your hand. Promise.
Dede was blinded.
Dede was blinded. That's right. How was he blinded?
Smoke.
A gun.
A gun. Thank you, Promise. That's right. And they lost everything, didn't they? Let's start off there.
Hold on. I just said
Nope. Brandy, put your hand down.
potato fish.
Hold still, said Nokomis impatiently. She was bathing Dede's face and eyes with warm tea, brewed from the needles and roots of balsam trees. They had made camp on the north side of the big lake. Now there was no question that they would have to wait until freeze-up to cross the great Wabashkiki, the swamp that stretched before them. It was terrible to see Dede stumbling about, his eyes wrapped or hanging onto the arm of Yellow Kettle. He could still not see, but Nokomis made him lie still as often as she could, bathed his eyes, and counseled him to have patience. During the robbery, Fishtail had grabbed his gun, but had little ammunition. The women still had their knives. Omakeyas had been rolling up her blanket, so she had something to keep her warm, which she now shared with Bijins. Mama had her one kettle and a rice knocker. Old Tallow had her dogs. At that moment, Old Tallow and her dogs were out hunting with a spear she'd made by tying her knife to a heavy stick. She was determined to bring down a bear for its meat and fur. Old Tallow missed the coat that became her blanket, her shelter once the wind grew cold. That coat had been made of furs and velvets, calico patches, and patterned wool blankets. It had been Old Tallow's favorite possession, and she vowed that if she ever found Albert Lepatre, she would skin him alive and add her pelt to his collection. Ooh. Omakiyas knew she actually meant that. She shuddered, but felt in her own heart there was no revenge harsh enough for what Lepatre had done. What will they do with Jean, with Jojed? She asked every day. Everyone had a different idea. Dede was sure that Lepatre would try to ransom them off to a trader and say that he had rescued them. Fishtail had whispered his fear that they would be sold as servants to some farm family. Nokomis believed that they would be rescued somehow. Everyone had a conflicting opinion, but their hearts were wrenched. Angeline especially had grown fond of the children. She and Fishtail had planned to adopt them in a ceremony once they had reached a new home place. At least, said Angeline, if they were sold to a trader or a priest, they would not starve. Right now, that was a distinct possibility for them all. They had faced starvation before, but never without their guns and traps. Omakiyas could not imagine what would happen to them if Dede's eyes did not heal. His cheeks were still blackened, his forehead still bruised green and dark yellow. The worst thing was, the question, why, had no answer. Lepatre had been ridiculous, pompous, and an embarrassment sometimes. He neglected his family and believed himself a famous medicine man. He'd been known to steal a dried fish or two, but he had never been cruel. Perhaps the Ishkodewabu has destroyed his heart, Yellow Kettle said. And I'll be sure to destroy the rest of him, said Old Tallow. Omakiyas finished weaving a length of basswood twine and set out into the low-growing woods around their camp to set rabbit snares. She wasn't having much luck, and the sight of fat rabbits running here and there, not cooking in their one remaining stew pot, infuriated her. There were lots of rabbits this year, but could she catch one? It appeared not. She bent over, looking closely at the ground for rabbit tracks or droppings. Quill, who now wore the raggedest of skins and an old makazinan, passed her without a laugh. He didn't even tease her about her lack of skill. She figured things must be pretty bad if Quill didn't even laugh at her. Aren't you even going to make fun of my snares? She asked. Quill crouched next to her and examined her work, but said nothing. He smelled better now that his porcupine was too big to stay on top of his head. The quilling of Lepatre's face had been its last valiant act. "Where is your warrior animal?" asked Omachias. "Recovering its strength," said Quill in a sad voice. The porcupine had not been the same since it was flung through the air. It was still in shock and didn't want to leave its human beings. The porcupine stayed in camp, munching the soft inner bark of aspen that Quill gathered for it every morning. As it ate, he stroked its nose and murmured words of praise. "I'm going to catch a beaver," said Quill, still refusing to criticize Omachias' work. He was turning into a very good hunter and had fashioned a limber bow and swift arrows to replace those that were stolen. He had taken 4 beaver pelts, and Omachias had stretched them. They were making a coat for old Tallow. If Omachias could snare some rabbits, she'd make a rabbit blanket for Nokomis. It was already getting cold at night, and snow was in the air. With freezing hands, Omachias set 10 snares, just where she hoped rabbits would jump. Then she gathered some high bush cranberries. They would be good with venison if only Fishtail could get a deer. Such were their lives now. They had planned to reach Auntie Muskrat's camp rich with furs, their packs bursting with manumine and dried huayas, pemmican, and seeds. Now they were reduced to scratching for survival. Place of medicines. Guys following along? Clarence? Gary? When Nokomis realized that her medicines and her garden had been stolen, she had actually cried. The seeds were her life's work. Each was selected over the years from the corn or potato or squash with the vigorous qualities that Nokomis coveted. There was no replacing such a treasure. Omachias had never seen her grandmother weep before. Old Tallow's face had boiled into a thundercloud, for she so loved Nokomis. Old Tallow had stomped from the camp to deal with her anger. For a time, she could be heard thrashing around and growling in the bush. "Granddaughter," said Nokomis one morning, "come with me and gather. At least we have everything we need right here." She gestured at the swamp before them. "What you see before you is a great medicine bundle." She and Omachias walked out into the Wabashkiki and set to work then, assembling all the medicines that they would need for winter. They gathered bakwanatig, the staghorn sumac, whose furry red berries made a strengthening drink when added to water. Nokomis dried great clumps of these berries as well, for they would stop bleeding. They picked bagizoim, mugwort, which was a good heart medicine. They dug the roots of the inish milkweed and collected the leaves of the ojakiji beak, which they would use to heal bruises, and the roots that cured boils. They collected wishkobimashkosi, sweetgrass, and weekin, sweet flag, for colds and coughs, toothaches, cramps, fevers. They brought back great armfuls of reeds for Angeline to use in weaving mats. Omachias spent each day of that moon in the great medicine swamp with Nokomis. In her later years, she would realize that this was when she had received the greatest part of her education. She learned all that Nokomis knew. This was how she became a healer. This section is called A Faint Light. There was frost on the ground in the mornings now. One day, Omachias walked out into the swamp to check her snares and saw that Quill was gently adjusting each one of them. He was helping her without telling her. Omachias turned away, not sure whether to be grateful or ashamed. Later on, when she checked the rabbit snares, she saw that Quill's adjustments had been smart, and 2 rabbits, wabuzug, were caught. Omachias pulled the loops off each wabuz, reset the snares, trying to copy Quill's method, and brought the animals home to Mama. Hoa! Bijins was adventurous and tumbled everywhere around the camp. Yellow Kettle constantly worried that he would walk into the fire or fall into deep water. As often as she could, she gave him some little task, but he was lively as a kitten and slipped away whenever he could to inspect his surroundings. Fishtail was using every one of his bullets wisely. He'd brought home a deer and a runty moose, and Mama had made a new set of skin clothes for Bijins, as well as moccasin lined with rabbit fur. He at least had warm clothing. Mama took the rabbits gratefully from Omachias. Her temper had improved remarkably during this crisis. It seemed that she was firmer with herself and more in control when her little family was in danger. and she was very worried about Day Day. She nursed him with tenderness. I didn't catch the wabuzug. It was Quill, said Omakias. He followed me, reset my snares, and the rabbits hopped right in. Why is he so good at it? Maybe his porcupine told him a few things, said Mama jokingly. Omakias wondered if there wasn't something to what Mama said. She walked over to the porcupine, who was, as usual, sitting in the corner of the camp clearing with a pile of bark before him. He was looking fat and worried. Omakias sat down on the ground near him. Gog, she said, what is my brother's secret? The porcupine looked at her with sympathetic, shining black eyes, but of course, said nothing. Omakias touched its nose, and it sniffed at her gently. Why don't you ask your brother his secret? Asked Mama. But the very thought of asking Quill for his advice, well, it was just impossible. She was the older sister. She could hardly ask for her younger brother's help. She was supposed to be the one with knowledge. Omakias kept setting her snares every morning, and during the day she was sure her brother went out and made his clever adjustments. Now there were always a few rabbits caught. Omakias thought that she would learn by looking at exactly what he had done in her absence, but once the rabbit had struggled in the loop, it was hard to tell how Quill had set it. She went to Day Day. As he rested in darkness, he liked to have her come and talk to him and sing to him. He was using his knife to carve out a new wooden chess set. His old one, much treasured, had been one of those things stolen. He was carving by feel and doing a good job of it. Little horses, towers, pawns, and robed bishops were lined up next to his bed of springy fir boughs. He reached his hand out, and Omakias held it as she sat beside him. Day Day, can you help me snare rabbits as well as my brother? Can you give me your knowledge? You must think like a rabbit, he said. Omakias was silent. What did this mean? My daughter, said Day Day, I have had a great deal of time to reflect as I lie here. One of the things that I regret most, stolen from us by Le Poitre, was my medicine bag. I was keeping your feathers in that bag, also the stone pipe that belonged to my father and his father before him. I will have to make a new pipe. I will have to travel to the land of the Buanug in order to trade for their stone, or I will have to use the black stone that we find further north. I miss that pipe of my father's very greatly. And I also missed the 4 feathers you gave me. You were so brave in taking them. I meant to use those in a ceremony. What ceremony? Asked Omakias. A ceremony that would honor my daughter when she became a young woman, said Day Day. But Angeline is already, Omakias began. Then she realized that Day Day was talking about his younger daughter. Her face grew warm and she couldn't speak. Day Day sounded sad when he spoke again. My girl, if I do not recover, I want you to live a strong life. Don't talk that way, said Nokomis, walking into the birch bark house. You are going to get well if you just lie still. I am growing weak here, said Day Day irritably. You are allowing your face and eyes to heal. Day Day sighed, and as Nokomis unwrapped the cloth and the medicines from his face, he said grumpily, You're going to dose me again, I suppose. Yes, said Nokomis. Now lie still while I wash your eyes with my balsam tea. Balsam tea, that's all I hear. Your great cure-all. Nokomis tenderly poured the warm tea from a clean birch bark macaque that she made each time she prepared the new tea. Day Day quietly bore her ministrations. Beka, he said, blinking as she lifted the cup away. Beka, Nuku. What is it? Nuku, Day Day said softly, blinking harder. I can see a little light. The leaves fell off the trees in great windy gusts, and the days were cold, but with Quill's help, rabbits continued to be caught in the snares. If there was nothing else to eat, there was always rabbit soup. Omakias and Nokomis dug cattail roots, and Mama boiled them and mashed them into the stew. Every day, they added one more item to their store of survival goods. At night, as they sat together around the fire, they were closer than ever in their determination. Old Lepatre will not undo us, said Yellow Kettle, but it worries me. What did he do to those children? And what about my sister, Muskrat? If he harmed one hair, I'll have his whole head, said Old Tallow grimly, gulping at her soup. She looked ferociously at the spoon she'd carved and smiled. Omakias thought she'd bite the round part off just to prove her rage. I plan to hunt him down one day, said Quill. The cold nerve in his voice chilled Omakias. It was as if her brother was becoming a different person. Le Padre will undo himself, said Nokomis. Nothing that you could do, any of you, could possibly be as evil as the spirit of the rum he drinks. They fell silent, knowing that this was true. You guys have to check out the cute picture on that page. Angeline passed around a basket of nuts. She was very smart about watching where squirrels and mice put their caches, and she rated them. The poor mice, said Fishtail, teasing her. Poor mice, said Angeline. We are in no position to feel sorry for them. We are just one skinny rabbit away from starving. But they'd banked their birch bark house well with earth and leaves, and their stomachs were full, for now. They all slept well, even though that night it snowed for the first time, and when they woke, the earth was shining and white. Okay, that was chapter 11.